So let me just get rid of this as well. So all right. I think the last week we strictly went on reciting from Masnavi, and it was basically going and looking at. We finished the introduction part. We went into the very first story, which is the girl, the king who falls in love with a slave girl, and just kind of trying to explore how that played out going forward. Again, I'm experimenting with a few things, and one of the things that I wanted to do today was that, because remember, as we are looking into exploring how Masnavi unfolds, Masnavi is the key to how we interpret everything, all the poems from the book of Shamsa Tabrizi. So I want us to get a sense of both sides in a way, and we may struggle at the very beginning. Of course, we have an expert among us. Mohsen is, has been with us for quite a while, and I'm sure he's gonna chime in, and we're gonna pick his brain a lot. But overall, what we're gonna try to figure out is that what we learn on Masnavi's side is actually transpiring into the book of poems of Shamsa Tabrizi. And one thing that I want you guys to remember, and I'm going to reiterate, is that Rumi recited Shamsa Tabrizi 10 years prior to reciting Masnavi. So the whole notion, and I think I repeated that the very first session that we had, the whole notion of putting Masnavi together was so that everyone else could understand what he meant by all these poems that he had recited. And because majority of these poems are full of symbolisms and introducing new meanings and new understandings into even certain words that he's using, and so on and so forth. So the poem that I want to, I think I sent it to you guys in an email. Am I correct? Did you guys all get it? It was called From Self to Self. Did I send that?
Yes, you did.
That's correct. We got it.
Very good. Okay. So that's the one that we're going to read. And I'm going to challenge Mohsen a little bit here, because this is one of the poems that recently in Farsi we also discussed it. And I'm going to let him kind of guess which one that was. And eventually I'll tell him. But again, this is going to be fun. And you have to, again, I want us to give ourselves a little bit of allowance here. This is at the very beginning of stages. A lot of things may not look the same. They are not sounding the same. We may be a little kind of confused about some of the terminology that he's using and so forth. It's okay. Don't let it distract you. Don't let it, disappoint you. It is going to be okay. We will get through this, and you guys all are going to just completely fall in love with Rumi poetry, I'm sure. Okay, so here it goes. If a tree could run or fly, it would not suffer from the teeth of a saw or the blows of an axe. If the sun did not run across the sky, the world would not see the colors of morning. If water did not rise from the sea, if water did not rise from the sea, plants would not be quickened by rivers or rain. It's only when a drop leaves the ocean and returns that it can find an oyster and become a pearl. When Joseph left his father, both were weeping. Didn't he gain a kingdom and a fortune in the end? Didn't the prophet gain the world and 100 empires by traveling to Medina? But you have no need to go anywhere, journey from yourself. Enter the mine of rubies and bath in the splendor of your own light. O great one, journey from self to self and find the mine of gold. Leave behind what is sour and bitter. Move towards what is sweet. Be like the 1,000 different fruits that grow from briny soil. This is the miracle. Every tree becomes beautiful when touched by sunlight. Every soul becomes God when touched by the sun of Tabriz. Okay. Couple of things I'm going to probably explain before we kind of dive into some of the discussions. And I'm going to, again, I'm going to ask you guys to jump in and you know, give us, you know, your opinion and what you think. We're going to eventually get a full, you know, understanding of what this poem is. But in the second section where it says, it's only when a drop leaves the ocean and returns, it can find an oyster and become a pearl. During Maulana or Rumi's time, what they believed, how they believed a pearl was made was that they felt it was a specific drop of rain, which would go into the ocean and it would go into the oyster. And therefore, that's what he's talking about as to the fact that the oyster, what it does is that it takes that drop and then it leaves everything else behind until that drop transforms into a pearl. On the next section, which is talking about, you know, the prophet, you know, travel to Medina. He's talking about those of you who are familiar with the Islamic history and so forth. You know, the prophet was in Mecca. He actually became a prophet in Mecca. Then he decided that to leave Mecca and go to Medina because he felt that, you know, the surroundings where he was not so helpful with respect to his mission, and therefore he had to go. And once he went to Medina, he got to then, you know, explore and become, you know, and fully realize and manifest what his mission was. And then he returned to Mecca again. Okay. So having said that, and again, you know, the title of this poem is From Self to Self. So just to, you know, and again, I want you guys to kind of reiterate that as you're looking at it. So who wants to go first? Whatever you have grasped out of this, I don't want you guys to be, and don't be shy. Again, this is our first really deep dive into this thing. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Mateen.
Yeah. Yeah. So self to self, I think it seems like that's a reference to kind of the sort of like the union I'm thinking about. Like you basically go back to when you go back to God. And so, it's like you kind of get it from the capitalization of the title. It's a lowercase self,
Right.
capital self. And then each one of these instances is a reference to some kind of journeying. And yeah, each one of these instances, and I'm sure, it's all different journeys, it seems, and it kind of like
So these journeys that you're looking at, what is significant about the journeys as you're looking at, the first part and the second part? I mean, if you were to look at each section as it's written, so for instance, I mean, the first part, let's just explore it real quick. If a tree could run or fly, it would not suffer from the teeth of a saw or the blows of an axe. Okay. If the sun did not run across the sky, the world would not see the color of morning. So now, what's the difference between these two examples that he's bringing up?
I mean, it seems like it's movement.
It's movement, exactly. So that's awesome. So what is he saying about this? What is the difference between so tree, because it cannot move, right?
Yeah.
It's not nimble, right? It's gonna suffer, the what you call it, the teeth of a saw, right?
Mm.
And the sun, because it actually does move, the sun is able to actually, bring about the beauties on a daily basis and the colors of the morning. Perfect. So if you look at every single section, I think you will see that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right. Now, since you went first, I'm sorry, So my question is, why is movement important here? What is significant about movement?
You get to experience different things.
Awesome. Okay, very good. Oh my God.
May I jump in?
Absolutely, Rasul. Why not? Yes.
What this whole thing reminds me of is that even the largest body of water standing still is eventually going to smell.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter how big you are, how much you know, you stand still, you're not going to get anywhere.
Okay, very good. So what I think everybody is insinuating to the fact so far that there is a journey that we all experience, right? I mean, the example that Rasul just also gave, if a body of water is about to stay, completely still, it would eventually start to rotten, and it's just going to, get, change colors and so forth, and it's not going to be usable anymore. So the fact of the matter is, I mean, as we're looking at this, is that the movements that he's talking about is something that's going to get us to grow. So how does that happen? I mean, in English, one of the examples that we use is this. When we tell people to challenge themselves, what's the expression that we use?
Get out of your comfort zone.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Very good, Salman. So you have to get out of your comfort zone. So you challenge your comfort zone, and as you challenge your comfort zone, it's eventually going to pay off. If you stay in the comfort zone, and if you look at this, every single verse of this, if we were to refer to it as that, if we stay in that, it's going to keep us within our limitations, and we can never explore what's out there and what's possible, right? Okay.
If I may add one more statement, I feel the movement or the journey that you said, it is going to happen whether we want it or not, and is basically kind of encouraging that we have to initiate that movement. I mean, even though we are going to get there, we, I guess in Farsi, bemir qabl az murdan, that's basically refer me to that one.
You know, the dying before you die, and
Yes.
so we're going to actually get to that very quickly. Yes. Do you, Mohsen, did you guess which ghazal in Farsi this was?
I was actually even went to Google to see. No, I couldn't find it.
Okay, so it's ghazal number 1142.
Okay.
For those of you guys who want to look it up in Farsi. And yeah, it's ghazal number 1142. Okay, so let's get back to it.
Speaking of the specific number that you just gave, I've been racking my brain to figure out which one this was ever since you sent it. and did all different kinds of things to figure it out, but unfortunately I couldn't. So I think it will help me personally a lot if I knew the source of this. Then I can get mentally prepared better and participate and be more productive in the session.
So we're gonna challenge you both ways. That's fine. Again, you know, it's just that because of the pace of the sessions that we're having, you know, again, like I said, I'll try to give you guys the exact. So I tell you, so this happened that I found a translation in accordance to what we had prepared before for a Farsi class. Now, there are translations that don't necessarily exactly correspond. So I just want to make sure I give myself that disclaimer every time. So, okay, very good. Let's get back to our discussion. Let me, another thing that I want to talk about. So let's talk about the significance of this mention of Joseph and his father. Okay. What is significant about that? Are you guys familiar with this story?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So Rasul, what is significant about the story of Joseph and his journey?
So when he was left for dead, he eventually went and became, for lack of a better word, the minister of finance at the pharaohs, and essentially brought the family back over there and took care of the family. Never gave up.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
So I like the way you actually condensed it very, very to a couple of statements. That's awesome. All right.
Yeah.
So what happens with Joseph, as you said, you know, there is the story goes where, you know, he was, you know, the last of, you know, his brothers. I think there were 11 of them. And what happened was that because of his looks and basically the way he was being a little bit more, you know, treated differently by his father, because his father had a specific knowledge about his eventual fate. What happens with Joseph is that, you know, one day he decides that he wants to go out with his brothers. Molana, you know, refers to the story over and over again because there's a few significance about it, and I'm going to just bring them up here, and eventually we're going to go over them. So one thing about that's significant about Joseph is the fact that he becomes a victim of jealousy, which Rumi doesn't like at all. Jealousy is something that he feels it comes completely from our worst part of our ego. And as it actually comes, he believes in the fact that jealousy brings about a very, you know, negative energy into another human being. And that negative energy is something that he believes destroys our even our daily lives. And in this case, what happened to Joseph is that, you know, he became, you know, he got this, you know, he was the victim of jealousy by his brothers. They threw him into a well. They brought a piece of his cloth to his father and to their father, and told them that, you know, yeah, apparently he was killed by the wolves. And then he eventually is found from the bottom of the well. And as you said, yeah, he goes into one of the pharaohs, and eventually he becomes the king of, you know, that's at that time, the Egypt of that time. Within that, there is also a love story, because one of the, you know, wives of Pharaoh also falls in love with him, and then decides to actually, you know, somehow get him in the same room with herself and so forth. And he refuses that, and so on and so forth. And because of that, eventually the wife tells a different story, and that story becomes the, you know, how he actually gets thrown into jail. And once he's in jail, there is a dream that one of the pharaohs has, and they go back to, you know, him, because he was able to interpret dreams. And eventually he tells them that, for instance, the dream was apparently he sees 7 cows which are dying, and 7 cows which are extremely, you know, well fed. And then, you know, what they found out was that this was 7 years of bad, you know, drought, and 7 years of prosperity, and all that. So there's different sections of Joseph's life that Rumi uses. But in this one specifically, yes, he's talking about the fact that, as Salman said, if he had not let go of his comfort zone, he would not have gotten to the greatness that you know he's part of, and so forth. And that is, you know, something that you know definitely you know, Rumi is very fond of, and so forth. Okay. So, and Mateen very elegantly also referred to the fact that the first part of the poem talks about the fact that you want to stay somewhere. You want to be not nimble. You want to be completely stuck, or in this case, you know, completely without movement. And if you are in like that in your life, that again, you know, brings a lot of different harms towards your way. Whereas if you start going around, and if you start, you know, getting out of your comfort zone, and if you start, you know, challenging yourself, and so on and so forth, that is where you actually start seeing prosperity, and so forth. All right. Now, let's get to this line real quick. But you have no need to go anywhere. Journey within yourself. Enter a mine of rubies, and bath in the splendor of your own light. Okay, so what is it saying?
I think, if I may,
Sure.
I think it's kind of like the poem we had last night in Farsi.
Mm-hmm.
So what encouraging is you go to yourself and get everything needed for this basically journey within yourself. And I guess last night he brought a lot of examples of like wine and other things that it can boil in within yourself and change it to what the outcome that we are looking for, or basically changing to, you know, joining the God, or, you know.
Absolutely. So I think what you're referring to is, yeah, yesterday we had a poem yesterday, and we will eventually have that poem in English as well. But what it is that Rumi believes that the journey that we need to take in order for us to unlock and unveil what is hidden within us is the journey inside ourselves. Now, remember that at the very first session, I said that we are dealing with 4 elements in everything that we do. One is the heart, the mind, the ego, and the soul. Okay. Which the mind and the ego are always working together. These guys are the dynamic duel that when we are born, they start, kind of energizing everything around us. They start telling us what is hurting us, what is, safe for us, and so forth. And what they serve ultimately is our body. So our ego and the mind are the ones that tell us that if you go somewhere, you will be greeted with kindness, or if you go somewhere, you will be a stranger. None of us like to go into a gathering or a setting that is full of people that we don't know. Why? Because our mind and our ego engage together, and they're like, you're going to look strange. You're going to have a tough time, saying hello. You're going to have tough conversations and all that. It is all about that. Even if now the element of heart, and I want you guys to kind of, start warming up to this thing. And when I say warming up, we're going to work with that a lot going forward. But the heart is basically a transmission antenna, a transmitting antenna, that it transmits the messages that we are supposed to get from the divine source, which is, in this case, we can refer to God or even life as the divine source. And that transmission comes to our heart. Let me use some examples. I mean, sometimes you guys, let's say, there is something that you want to do about, let's say, about your family, and your heart is saying that, hey, you've got to do it. And then your mind is something that actually sets you back and says, well, if you put yourself out there, you may actually neglect, other aspects of your life, and you may be vulnerable. But your heart is like, you've got to do this right now. Something that, for instance, when it comes down to your children, it's always your heart that actually engages with you. And then you evaluate certain things, of course, with your mind, but it's your heart which actually pushes you in order to do something, or actually bring about the ability to do things for them. So the heart actually shows up here and there, but majority of the time we kind of, push it to the side, because majority of the stuff that the heart says doesn't make sense. Why? Because we're not quite familiar with how it works. But the mind and the ego, they make sense to us because they've been with us ever since we were born, right? Now, in this case, he goes, but you have no need to go anywhere. Okay, so you don't have to necessarily travel from Mecca to Medina. You don't have to necessarily, try to experience how, a tree can be nimble or anything like that. He's saying you have to do a journey within yourself. And the journey that he's talking about is the fact that you've got to start deep in, taking a journey and a deep dive into your heart. Enter the mine of rubies. And in this case, he's talking about the heart is full of these jewels, which have been completely untapped. That's why he's referring to the word mine. Mine is something that once you find it, you have to take a few tools with you in order to dig it out. Things are not just out there. If you discover a mine, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to order a bunch of tools, because you have to mine stuff out. Heart is just like that. You have to discover it. You have to find it. You have to become familiar with it and bask in the splendor of your own light. And the light is what, eventually was something that was shone on Rumi's heart, which he in another poem describes that my heart just completely broke open and I was able to receive all the light that I could. So that is the journey that he's looking at for us. Now, I think now the journey from self to self, it makes a little bit more sense. So the very first self, and I think Mateen did also, refer to this, is the ego, and the second self is your heart. Journey from self to self and find the mine of gold. Leave behind what is sour and bitter, move towards what is sweet. Be like the 1,000 different fruits that grow from briny soil. Now, any comments about that?
I wanted to give you an example to bring this abstract notion of looking inside to what's going on in our lives nowadays.
Awesome.
Because of this COVID that's everywhere, people not traveling as much.
Yes.
But what they have missed throughout their lives is what's around the corner from where they live. They never took the time to go look where it's close to them, the beauty near them, the museums that's near them that they don't have to fly to go see. That's essentially looking close to where everything is inside yourself included.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, isn't it interesting that, what you're referring to, it is, I have a feeling, although people are distant from each other, but these days people are trying to be more in touch.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that what we're realizing is that connection, how important it used to be. Now, in my Farsi class, I always talk about this, that, and we will get to this, by the way, in Masnavi. Last night, we were also talking about this. There is an expression which we call it qaza wa qadar. And I think all of you guys somehow understand what that means, but it's basically God's will and God's destiny, something that God just wants it. Once that happens, we have no control over it. And what Rumi tells us is that once you are faced with a situation like that, the only thing that you need to do is you need to be patient, you need to be thankful, and you need to completely open up your heart, because you can never fight the will of God, but you can always benefit from it. And I know this is hard for people to believe, but this is actually something that through examples, he's going to start showing us how that works. And I believe COVID-19, as it actually happened in our lives these days, is something that's actually making us understand what is truly, what is it that we had, which we weren't grateful for. We weren't. I mean, we were not grateful for the fact that we could see somebody and hug them, or we could shake hands, or we could just be, completely in close proximity of each other without fear. That is all. It's interesting that God works in such a, sometimes I say God is a comedian, because he likes to actually kind of play with you in a way that, listen, what you thought was not a gift, I gave it to you and you didn't see it.
Perhaps you can translate قدر عافیت کسی داند که به مصیبتی گرفتار آید is exactly this.
It is, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, whoever, is, you always find what was comforting after you experience the discomfort, basically.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Yeah. So having said that, in this case, in this lines, when he says, be like the 1,000 different fruits that grow from briny soil, a briny soil is something that, you can never eat that. Or you can never even, it's dirty. It's something that, you don't necessarily experience anything nice about it. And in this case, the briny soil is what gives you eventually what is so sweet and what is so delightful to have. And it only is in, and Rumi is trying to promise us that if you actually do this, you will get there. You will be able to get this, ultimate nice comfort out of the discomfort that you may experience, as you just mentioned yourself, Rasul. Okay. Just a very quick thing at the very last line, which says, this is the miracle. Every tree becomes beautiful when touched by sunlight. Every soul becomes God when touched by the son of Tabriz. Mateen, what does it mean that when it says every soul becomes God?
That's the union. When you make it back to God.
Very good. Yes. And that's because we were separated from God, right?
The reed bed.
Exactly. Thank you very much. So this is basically us getting back to the origins. You're right. When he was telling us the song of the reed, how we were separated and uprooted from where we belonged, what he's saying is that this is a miracle of this journey. So the fact of the matter is that everything that has been separated through this experience, as you said, the experience of life and this experience of going through these journeys would eventually become one with where it came from. So son of Tabriz, in this case, this is a little bit of a bad translation. Let me just give you guys an anecdote as far as what, because you'll see this a lot in Rumi poetry. So he was transformed because of his association with Shams Tabrizi. We talked about that already. Shams Tabrizi asks him a couple of questions, comparing Prophet Muhammad to what do we call Bayazid Bastami. Both of these guys are extremely extremely well recognized and realized beings. And in this case, what he's saying is that which one of them do you think is doing the right thing, or is the right person, and what in what they have said. Rumi, at first, gets a little angry, and eventually, he realizes what the question was. Now, everybody feels, unfortunately, the bad translation of these poetries, and I've seen it in English and also in Farsi. They think that this poem is specifically referring to that person, Shams Tabrizi. So they're like, you have to read this as if Rumi is praising Shams. But that's not the case. Rumi is not, it is that Rumi is praising Shams any chance he gets. But what he's talking about in majority of these things, when he's talking about Shams himself, he's talking about a complete soul. And when he's talking about Tabriz as the place, is the place or the what we, basically grant ourselves in our lives so that our souls can become complete. So when he says every soul becomes God, when touched by the son of Tabriz, what it means is that we grant ourselves the area or the place so that we can start that transformation, and then our soul starts realizing its greatness, and therefore it can actually become God, or it can actually come, join what is being uprooted from or where it's been separated from. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Awesome. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. Let's now go back to our Masnavi. So I think we had a couple of so this will happen, I'm sure. You know, a couple of us are going to be here and a couple of us are not going to be here, and then we're going to be here and they're not going to be here. So let's see. Martin, since you've been consistently here, do you remember what we talked about last week? You're muted in case if you're speaking. Sorry.
Sorry, I was saying
Okay.
the king had a dream,
Right.
and so he went to meet he prayed a sincere prayer,
right,
to the source, and something came to him in a dream, and then he came to meet this response to his prayer.
Right, or the person that they said that you're going to get. So eventually what we discovered was a couple of things. One was that the girl starts getting sicker and sicker as these doctors start, operating on her and giving her, antidotes and so forth. The girl keeps getting sicker and sicker. And eventually the king is, and by the way, there's a point that, I think if God should will, or inshallah, is something that, Rumi refers to, the fact that, these physicians were so full of themselves, in a sense, that they forgot that there is also a will of God in everything that they do. They felt that they were the only ones who could actually do this, and they had all the tools that they needed. So therefore, they were going to go about doing what they thought they knew best. And in this case, Rumi is saying in these poems, he says, many have failed to say if God should will, although their souls were in accordance still. The more these men produced a slave or cure, the more distress the girl seemed to endure. So the more they gave her medicine and so forth, the more, she got sicker and sicker. And that's when, the king realizes that he needs to now kind of start asking a higher power and all that. And that's when he actually goes into the mosque. And this line is the line that I think we spend quite a bit of time on. I just want to go over it real quick, which says, oh, you whose smallest gift is the whole world. He's talking about God and the greatness of God. The fact that the smallest gift that has been given to us by him is this entire world that we live in. It is a powerful statement. It's a powerful sentence. Words can't describe this mystery you have unfurled. And therefore, in this case, we are still discovering, and COVID-19 has taught us more about how gifted we were, and we've had some of these things taken away from us. So the king then, asks that I need this, I want her to heal, and I'm asking you for help. And another thing that Rumi mentions is this line, which says, when from his inmost depth he raised the scream, the sea of bounty surged and sent him a dream. This is another beautiful line in this poem. The fact that, every time if we want something, we have to go to our heart. We have to go to the innermost depth and ask for it. That's when this sea of bounty or this, ocean of giving starts to work. Okay. So then, of course, then he gets the dream. And I think this is where we kind of left off up until here. The next day came, right? I think that's where we were.
Yeah.
All right. So the next day came, the promised meeting neared. The sun shone bright, the stars had disappeared. The king gazed from the watchtower eagerly to see what had been promised secretly. Beyond the crowd, he saw a virtuous one. Among the shadows, he was like a sun. Just like a crescent moon, he came to view a non-existent image seen by you. So basically, he goes to wherever is the observation deck, or wherever his castle is, and he starts looking himself. He's the one who actually starts looking, and he sees somebody who is extremely distinct. And in this case, just to verbatim translation from the Farsi poem, is like, he was shining like a moon, or he was old, and he had a bent back just like the moon. I mean, either way, it's the right form of understanding where that's coming from. So in form existing only in one's mind, the world is turned by forces of this kind. Now, this is another thing that if I were to this is another statement that now he's trying to say that things as they come to form, they come to form from what we think. So whatever is something that we have, whenever we have thoughts in our minds, our thoughts are going to eventually evolve and become and comprehend and transform into a form, and we'll see that. Okay. Their war and peace are based on fantasy, and shame and pride are both illusory. While images that saints may often love. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Okay. While images that saints may often love are visions of the moon faced ones above. The image which while dreaming his just seen, the king saw him in just, this king saw in him just as it had been. And so instead of chamberlains, he went himself to greet his guest who had been sent. All right. So in this case, what he's saying is that because of the fact that he had imagined and he had dreamed about it, and this was a direct dream, a direct message to him, because of the way he asked for it, he had no doubt, as he actually saw what he asked for manifested in the broad daylight, and therefore he went to actually greet him rather than sending his soldiers and all that. So both swimmers used to seize of union. Their souls without a thread were sworn as one. Now, in this case, what he's saying is that once you are connected to this bounty, a sea of bounty that is just aching and waiting for you to tap into. I mean, again, this statements that we read up here, I urge you guys to remember it over and over, that where is it? When from his innermost depth he raised a scream, the sea of bounty surged and sent a dream. This sea of bounty is something that we need to be very, very mindful of and very, very conscious of. The fact of the matter is that we're going to see this again over and over, that Rumi is going to refer to it, that this universe is all about giving. This is what the universe just is supposed to do. It's supposed to give. And we need to just tap into this untapped resource for us. Remember, we were talking about certain attributes that comes with, being godlike or being God. And one of them is abundance. What we refer to as God has an abundance amount of resources for us and for every single one of us. The fact of the matter is that what limits us is when our mind and our ego engages and starts telling us that, oh, wait a second, the world is now 8 billion people. The reality is that, yes, the world is 8 billion people, but there is a connection between me and God and this bounty of bounty that's supposed to work, that is supposed to surge. And this is why he's talking about the fact that now that the king was able to connect with this sea, he found another swimmer and they connected, and now they become one. And now they know each other because they are in the same place together, in the same sea. So that kind of, starts to, basically sew them together. The one I love is not that made, but you. One thing led to another, as they do. So in this case, what happened is that the king realizes that the real beloved that he is looking for is not that maid, is actually something else. And he just found it. What he found is that connection to this sea of abundance. And he's like, this is what I was looking for. This is what I had lost. And this is what I just found. And now he's talking about your Mustafa and I'm Omar, your friend, prepared to serve you till the bitter end. Now, this goes back to the Islamic history where Prophet Muhammad and Omar were, because of Omar's, I believe he was a wealthy individual. It was Abu Bakr and Omar and Osman. And in this case, Omar was both wealthy and it was pretty powerful in his community and so forth. And because of that friendship, Prophet Muhammad was able to establish, Islam and, basically be able to move his agenda forward and so forth. And in this case, and by the way, Rumi loves Omar. He loves him. He loves Omar and he loves Ali. These are the two ones that he actually explicitly and specifically talks about in his poetry. So we're going to get to that eventually and all. But what he's saying is that now their friendship just became like Mustafa and Omar. Okay. All right. Any questions? So now we go into a section which, do you guys need a break? Is anybody tired? We got
minutes be okay.
What's that?
How much longer we have, that all depends on that.
Well, unfortunately, what happens with me is that I don't keep track of time that well. And then I keep going until somebody complains. But we probably have another half an hour to 45 minutes. I mean, okay. Realistically speaking, if you want, you guys can take a 10-minute break and then we come back and continue the rest. Is that all right?
I'm good. I don't need to go.
Everybody else is okay?
I'm okay. Are you okay?
I'm fine. Okay. So we're going to go.
Yeah, that's a question. Yeah.
Let's go.
Because, geez, in my other class, of course, then, I got to wear different hats. All right. So in this section, what he's referring to, he just gives a pause to the whole story. And what he's referring to in here is that everything has a specific manner. And there is a manner in which we are supposed to seek our connection with God. And this is important because manners are things that, if you were to just define what a manner are things that are taught as well as experiences, as well as, so certain manners are taught to us, and certain manners come through our experiences. Let me give you an example. So for instance, we are taught that we're supposed to respect our elders. Okay. So in some cultures, once somebody walks in, we may get up and stand fully. Some cultures, we may just, acknowledge them and things like that. But then, so that's something that's taught to us. And then there is a manner of experience, whereas, for instance, what we realize is that when you go into a business meeting, so the experience tells us that in a business meeting, if we are about to negotiate a pretty hard contract, we go in with a very specific tone and a very specific mindset, and we use a specific manners and lingos. Okay, so it goes into your shake hand, and things like that. How do I shake your hand? How do I do this? How do I do that? And those are the manners that we are taught to us. All of these things eventually are manners that are engaged in our ego and mind. And Rumi in here is talking about a manner in which we're supposed to learn, and from that, this is supposed to get us closer to our beloved and God. So he brings it up right away. Now, so let's see what he says. Let's pray to God for manners in their place, since those who lack them lose out on his grace. So what he's saying is that as you are, remember, he's telling us that we have to pray from our innermost being, place, and ask for what we want. And if we don't have the right manner, he's saying that it just doesn't work. It's not as though it's just themselves. It's not as though it's just themselves they harm. They set the world on fire, disrupt the calm. Now, in this case, he's coming back and saying that those who do not obey certain manners, not only they harm themselves, they also put the rest of the world in a harm as well. Now, I can actually tell you guys that, yeah, there are examples of it outside that, certain people, everything has a specific manner associated with it. And once you start disrupting your surrounding or disrupting everything around you, that manner then, eventually executes in a false way and can actually cause divisions. Let's say, if you acknowledge certain group over another group, you start introducing divisions, or introducing, criticisms, wrong criticism, or discriminations and things like that. All right. So a feast was sent down from above one day without demands or any price to pay. Moses had men who still bemoaned their lot. Why weren't some lentils spiced with garlic brought? Now, this is a biblical story about the story of the Moses and his people. And it is a biblical and Quranic story, which what he says that, God started sending them, food from the sky, and they were not happy about it. They weren't thankful. What they did was instead they complained that how come we're not getting lentils and we're not getting, I guess, onions or whatever else that was supposed to come. They felt it was supposed to come. The host then cleared the feast that had been laid, and each was forced to farm with scythe and spade. Now, in this case, what was given to them had to be taken away, and they were now, put in a position that they had to go and fetch, their own food. Jesus was interceded for a man. A bounteous feast was sent down in God's plan, but then some greedy brats who lacked respect, like beggars, grabbed the most they could collect. Now, another example that he's now bringing in is the example from Jesus. Whereas apparently, according to this story, there were a certain group of people that they wanted a type of food to be given to them and all. And in this case, the food was something that once it was provided to them, they started taking more than what they needed. So he's now kind of trying to tell us a little bit about the manner in which we're supposed to learn how to thank or treat what is provided to us and what is given to us. Think about that. If we are given a gift, something that's presented to us, and if we take more than what we need, this is what he said at the very beginning, that because of their bad manners, they set the world on fire, disrupt the calm. Once we don't do what is right, once our manners are not in accordance with the attribute of abundance, we could actually come and cause a disruption to people, for people, right? I mean, am I making sense in this? So
Yes.
Rumi is bringing up a point regarding the fact that there is a sea of abundance. You need to find out how you can tap into it, but you have to also understand that everything that's granted to you comes with a responsibility and a specific manner in which you're supposed to use that. Okay, so as he's bringing the example of these people during the time of Jesus, rather than they thank and be grateful for what was given to them, they started becoming greedy. But then, so he says, but then some greedy brats who lacked respect, like beggars, grabbed the most they could collect. The key word that I want you guys to remember here is greedy. Now, greed is also one of the attributes of ego, which Rumi hates. Majority of our problems, most of the time, well, not majority of them, some of our problems, let's say, that would be a bad assumption, but some of our problems most of the time comes because we are greedy. We want more than what we need. Again, COVID-19, let me give you an example of it. You guys remember that paper toilet was vanished for a period of time, everywhere. You couldn't find hand sanitizers, everywhere. Although there was ample supply of it. Problem was that the greed, which is an attribute of ego, and remember, the ego and the mind work together because you're supposed to feel safe. Your body is supposed to be protected. So the ego and the mind work together in order to protect you. So what they tell you is that as you're taking 2 hand sanitizers, take 2 more, just because maybe there is going to be a problem. Okay, you don't know. And I don't want to get off the charts here, but we're going to get to this again. And I know Mohsen has been a part of this class. The fact of the matter is that our life on a daily, not a daily, on a moment by moment basis is getting created. Our life is getting created every moment or every second. What happened 5 minutes ago, you can never go back to it. There is no rewind. And you have no idea what's going to happen 5 minutes from now. So think about it. What we have not created, we start planning for it, which is extremely stupid. But to us, it makes sense. And by the way, like I said, your instructor is also guilty as charged on some of these things. So don't think that I'm not, I'm an exception to the norm. No. I experienced this myself within me as well. But what it is that this is us. This is our ego. And at its full-fledged work, it just does what it's supposed to do. So let's go back to this. So like beggars grabbed the most they could collect. Even though Jesus cried, it's infinite. So think about it. Sometimes we know that what we have is infinite. Now, none of us, I don't think if you have experienced Jesus whispering into our ear that, things are infinite, but there are certain things that, we can, again, when we listen to our heart, sometimes our heart is like, hey, you don't need this. But your mind is like, no, you need it. Now, in this case, when Rumi is referring to the fact that Jesus was telling them, hey, it's infinite, don't worry about it. What he's saying is that what comes from your heart is that voice of Jesus, like, that tells you that, hey, this is infinite. Don't worry. You're not supposed to worry. Even though Jesus cried, it's infinite. You greedy fools, you'll not run out of it. Regard this lust and faithless attitude before God's feast as sheer ingratitude. Now, what it is that basically after, they basically kind of are like, no, we think that it's not. Therefore, we take more. When blinded by their greed, those low ingrates cause God to shut to all his mercy's gates. So he's given us another lesson, another life lesson, that every time we don't do what is right, we're not doing the right manner of living. We're not obeying by the law right manners, and we exercise our greed and our wanting more and all these egotistical attributes in our lives. As we actually start engaging those, what happens is that God is going to pull back on what he's been giving us. So it kind of makes sense when I believe in all cultures. This is why in all cultures, regardless, at least I don't know if there is any culture that says you should not be giving to the needy, or you should not be giving to the poor. And as you give, your life is going to be more prosperous. Every culture has it, irrespective of whether a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian. It does not matter. They all believe that as you give, your life is going to be more prosperous. That is why, because and Rumi is trying to explain that to us in here. That again, I'm going to read this out. Even though Jesus cried, it's infinite. You greedy fools, you'll not run out of it. Regard this lust and faithless attitude before God's feast as sheer ingratitude. When blinded by their greed, those low ingrates cause God to shut all his mercy's gates. So now he's referring to what is the word here is zakat, and zakat is basically tithing in I think in biblical religions. So it's like if you don't do the tithing, or if you don't give tithing, then rain won't fall. What he means is that it's not supposedly the rain itself. Rain is a symbolism for this abundance of this sea of abundance that we're supposed to tap into. It's like, if you don't do that, that thing won't give you anything. So you're supposed to give. And why do you have to give? Think about this. It's very simple logic if you think about it. One of God's attribute is the fact that he's a giver. He's kind. He is, he provides, right? And if we believe that we were created of God's breath, so that means that those attributes are within us as well. So if we carry those attributes, we're supposed to work with them and give, because those are God-like works. This is how you start realizing God-like being. This is why when we actually experience self to self, as we read it, every soul becomes God when touched by Son of Tabriz. This is what it means. Because every time that you do something that is completely God-like, then you're experiencing a God-like feeling, a God-like attribute, and you start, kind of getting that movement working for you. So if you withhold zakat, then rain won't fall. And fornication spreads a pledge to all. Now, in this case, he's referring to fornication as a great sin. But if you think about it, when you're looking at fornication, it's all about consuming what is rightfully not yours. Fornication is something that comes from our greed and also comes from our wanting more. And these are all, again, egotistical attributes that we carry. So if we exercise on that, we're gonna start experiencing the same thing as it would, be returned back to us. So what's the source of your deep misery? Acting without respect, concitedly. So in this case, he's saying that the very first thing that you could do to start digging yourself from the misery that you're experiencing is that you learn about how best you could act and start acting according to that, to that, rule, or to that, in that way. Whoever fails to show respect to God for robbing their men deserve the rod. So in this case, it says that if you cannot, this is a bad translation. Okay, so when you don't respect God, what that means is, in this case, if I were to refer to Farsi translation, it's talking about the fact that you have to realize God for its greatness. If you don't realize God for its greatness and what it has provided you and what it has done for you, then what's going to happen is that you are the one who are going to rob yourself from what can be given to you. Okay. So good manners are what made the heavens bright and angels sinless, purer than light. So basically saying that one of the attributes of being an angel is the fact that they are all obeying by the best of their manners. And that's what, brought them to heavens and allowed them to actually be in the heavens. Irreverence caused eclipses of the sun, and Satan, through his pride, to be undone. So in this case, he's talking about the fact that some of you may know that Satan used to be, before he became Satan, he was one of God's angels, and he was one of the things that he was very famous for was the fact that he would pray. He prayed for 6,000 years or something like that. And in the Quran, there is a story about it that, you know, he did not bow and, he did not respect and bow to, Adam when he was created. And what he's saying that because of his pride, which again is another ego attribute, he was then, all of his prayers were undone, and he was left, or he was kicked out of the heavens. Okay. All right. You guys know that if you have questions, you can always interrupt me, but I'm just going to kind of go forward as this story. I'm sure you're eager to hear the rest of it. So the meeting of the king with that saint who had appeared in his dream. So the king eventually meets the saint. The king embraces guest and won't apart. He welcomed him like love inside his heart, kissing his hand and forehead fervently. He asked about his home and family, then led him to his dais with this thought: the greatest treasure patience here has brought. Now, in this case, what he's saying is that the king is now very happy to have met this guy. And what happens is that eventually he takes him to, his inner sanctuary. And what he thinks to himself is the fact that every time I have been patient, the patience have brought me, great treasure. Another attribute and another thing that Rumi wants us to exercise is patience. He believes that everything comes right with patience. You're going to hear that a lot, that patience. Now in English, that they say the patience is the virtue, but Rumi basically believes that patience just opens up doors for us.
Chinese have an expression for patience too.
What is that?
Money grows on patience tree.
Very good. Awesome. And that is true. That is also very true. So Rumi talks about this quite a bit, and you guys will hear him a lot as we go forward. So the greatest treasure patience here has brought: the light of God, defense against all harm, showed patience is the key to joy and calm. And this is, again, something that this specific line, you guys will hear this a lot. Patience is the key to joy and calm. And in Farsi, it says, as-sabru miftahul faraj, basically. All right. The answer to our needs is meeting you. This is what the king is telling the guy. The answer to our needs is meeting you. All faults you fix before we ask you to. So he's saying that you are God sent. He's acknowledging that. And he's saying that you were given to me, or you were brought to me because of the need that I had and what I asked for. So I know that you can fix anything even before I ask you to. And why does he say that? The reason he says that is because Rumi believes that God is aware of everyone's heart, of what is inside everyone's heart. And because of that, God can do things before you even ask. But your heart needs to be connected in order for it to happen. So the answer to our needs is meeting you. All faults you fix before we ask you to. Translating what we keep inside our souls. Stretching your hand to lift those trapped in holes. And so in this case, he's basically saying that, as we connect to you, you're the one who can actually answer our questions and answer our needs. O chosen one, with whom God's pleased, don't leave. For then you'd make us suffocate, and grieve. And in this case, what he's saying is that, once, so think about this. If you ever find someone who is about to resolve all of your issues, you would never want that person to leave. You would never want that person to disconnect from you. This is exactly what it is. This is basically what he's trying to say, that, hey, don't leave us. Now that I'm connected to you, I don't want you to be separated from me. I want you to be here with me all the time. If you go, for then you would make us suffocate and grieve. Since you are our master, he who shows disdain will be destroyed if he does not refrain. They served the feast. The king then looked his hand and led him. They served the feast. The king then took his hand and led him to the harem as was planned. So they had, they took care of their guest, and then they took him to see the girl who is sick. Now, the king leads that doctor to now he's referring in this one is, calling him a doctor, but this is the doctor of the soul, basically, not the doctor who was, not to be mistaken by the doctors that were, trying to, fix this girl earlier as we read. So the king leads that doctor to the patient so that he can see how she is. Recounting all the sick girl had been through, he sat him down so he could witness too. Basically, now this old man sits next to the girl. Her pulse and pale complexion first he checked, discovering the cause through its effect. So he starts taking her vital signs, and basically what he's trying to also, and the second line, which says discovering the cause through its effect, is talking about the fact that he started looking and listening to her heart and breathing and all that stuff. The drugs that they had prescribed were like a curse, zapping her strength and making her feel worse. They failed to see the ailment deep within. God save us from what they are dabbling in. Now, this statement that when he says God save us from what they are dabbling in, the dabble that he's talking about is every time that we are given a challenge, every time we are going through a hardship, it's best for us to actually knock on God's door rather than someone else. Now, in this case, what Rumi never discounts the fact that, for instance, if you're sick, you have to see a doctor. He never discounts that, and he actually, he has verses of poetry about this. But he's saying you see the doctor and you also ask God so that the doctor can do what he's supposed to do. So in everything that we do in our lives, we're supposed to be connected to God, because asking God for what is right is what makes everything else go through correctly for us. He saw her pain, her secret was revealed, but from the king, he kept it all concealed. So basically, he started looking at this girl and he realized that the illness that she was experiencing was not physical. He realizes this, but he doesn't tell anyone. Her pain was not from Bill, the doctor learned. What is it? Sorry? Bile. The doctor learned the scent of wood is from its smoke discerned. Her grief revealed that it was from her heart, physically fine, her heart was torn apart. So basically he realizes that the illness is not physical, it's emotional, and it's coming from her heart. This is not cardiologist type of heart. It's the heart that actually gives us our feelings and how we connect to the universe. Being a lover means your heart must ache. No sickness hurts as much as when heartbreak. The lover's ailment's totally unique. Love is the astrolabe of all we seek. These two lines is basically probably, among many other important lines of poetry, these two are very important. So what he's saying is that in order for you to understand if somebody is hurting from love, you have to understand love, and then you have to know how breaking someone's heart, how does it actually feel? Because the heart aches differently when it's broken because of love. So then another thing that he says is this line, which basically tells us the importance of realizing the power of love. This word in Farsi is ostorlab, which, in this case, they're translating it exactly the same thing, but astrolabe was a tool that they used to use back in the days, those who kind of knew a little bit of a magic, and they knew things about the stars and how the stars would collide or, become, come into each other's orbits and so forth. They would be able to predict certain things. And the way they were predicting was by using this tool called astrolabe. Okay. Now, but what he says in here, in our Farsi class, we have replaced this word with GPS. So in order for you to find your way, into the mysteries of what you want to know about this universe, you have to know love. So that's why if I were to replace this with GPS, it would say love is the GPS of all we seek. So in order for you to find what you want, you have to know love. This is important. Please remember it. Whether you feel divine or earthly love, ultimately, we're distant for above. And what he's saying is that it doesn't matter how we experience love, whether we experience a divine love or experience a love that happens in our earthly lives between a husband and a wife, or a man and a woman, or any other type of love that, our heart pounds and aches for another thing or another being. Rumi says they all show similar attributes and similar signs. Love is the GPS of all we seek. Whether you feel divine or earthly love, ultimately we are destined for above. So wherever this feeling comes, you have to understand that it can. And in this case, what the line, ultimately we're destined for above, what the real meaning behind this line is that, however you experience love, it can actually guide you to elevate your soul and elevate yourself to the heavens, or to the connection that you're supposed to have to the source. Okay. To capture love, whatever words I say, make me ashamed when love arrives my way. Now, in order for him to show us how great love is, this is what he says. He's like, no matter what I say, I still cannot fully explain what love is. To capture love, whatever words I say, makes me ashamed when love arrives my way. while explanations sometimes make things clear, true love, through silence, only one can hear. And why is that? Because true love is always the connection between the hearts, not the connection that comes from the mouth and what we hear. So it's the hearts that connect. And once the heart connects, you just know it. You know it. So if you think about it, there are sometimes people ask, like, do you believe in love at first sight? And think about how people answer that question. Most people say, oh, no. And why do they say that? Because their mind and the ego is working. I have to go out with her. I have to do this. I have to do that. However, it's a possibility that you can fall in love at first sight because of what Rumi says here. True love, through silence, only one can hear. It is that silence that connects the hearts, and that's how people know that they're in love. The pen would smoothly write the things I knew, but when it comes to love, the pen or it's split in two. It's like no matter what I write, as the pen starts writing it, it actually breaks because it just can't take or bear the enormous pressure and emotion that comes with love. These lines are one of the most beautiful lines of Rumi poetry. But when it comes to love, it splits in two. Now, he's saying, it's funny, he uses an example, it's like a donkey stuck in mud is logic's fate. So it's like, if you want to use logic to explain love, it's like as if you're completely stuck in a mud. And he uses the word donkey just because he believes those who actually do use logic in order to explain love, they are like that. Love's nature, only love can demonstrate. Now, in this case, what he's saying is that the only way that you can actually explain love is by love itself. What that means is that you have to completely. This is why at the very beginning of Masnavi, if you guys remember, the very first session that we had, one of the lines was that it is going to a bloody way. It will be something that's going to get bloody and messy. And why does he say that? Because of the fact that as you step through this journey, you're going to start exploring things that you have not explored before. And it cannot be explained with logic. That's why it's only love that can explain love itself. And you only can experience that with your heart. So that's why realizing self is important, because you're about to take a journey from self to self. And in this self, the second self, you're going to discover your heart. And that heart is what's going to start showing you the way. Sunshine reveals its nature in each day. So if it's proof you want, just look this way. It's like, hey, if you want to have proof that there is sunshine, you look at the sun. You don't turn away from it. So if you want proof that there is love, you have to go after it. You have to experience it. You have to figure it out. You have to be it. Because other than that, it just won't work. All right. I'm going to leave you guys right here because I want you guys to go through these poems yourselves again. Please do it. The more we study this, the more we read these stuff, the more beautiful these things are going to get. And the mystery of this connection that Rumi starts making with us is going to just, you know, manifest itself eventually. And hopefully it starts manifesting itself in your lives as well.
I have a question regarding the line about the lover's pain is unique.
Uh-huh.
Is that saying that each lover has its own unique pain, or all lovers have the same pain, which is unique from any other pain?
I would say it's the latter than the first one.
So we're all connected. All
All
lovers.
lover, exactly. So it's a beautiful song. Actually, as you, because all lovers are experiencing, they're on the same journey. So they can actually talk through. I mean, if even if they had to explain it, somebody who has gone through a pain of loving someone else can totally relate versus someone who just hasn't, and he has had a pain of, I don't know, you know, getting a bad review on Yelp. I mean, it's literally a night and day difference.
Unless he loves Yelp.
Yeah, unless he loves Yelp. But it's the latter that you explained. It's those who actually have experienced it are on the same path that's the pain, or they go through the same experiences.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. If there are no more questions, I thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rasul,
Thank you.
for being up
Thank you.
so late.
Yes, indeed.
I hope it's worth it.
Yes, it is. Yes, in fact, yes, very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I'll see you guys next week. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.